So now just look at your last rent payment for a second, because almost half your income quietly disappears every month before you even touch it, and somehow you've trained yourself to think that's completely normal, which means every single month you're repeating the same pattern where a huge part of your effort just vanishes instantly, and you don't even pause long enough to question why it feels so normal. And because of that, you stop questioning it completely. You just quietly adjust your entire lifestyle around this one fixed cost, cutting things elsewhere without ever realizing what's actually controlling your decisions. So now it's not even just an expense anymore, it's a system that slowly shapes how you live, what you choose, and how much control you actually have without you ever noticing it happening. And when you really step back for a second, you notice how small your actual space is compared to everything around you. Yet somehow it still takes a massive portion of what you earn every month. At that point, you're not paying for a home, you're paying just to stay in the system. A fee for existing in a place that keeps getting more expensive. So now when you actually break it down, a huge chunk of what you earn immediately gets assigned away, before you even think about food, transport, or anything else that actually keeps your life running. Which basically means your financial life doesn't even start at zero, it starts already behind, because a fixed part is gone before you've made a single real decision about your money. And what's even more interesting is this wasn't always the case. There used to be a simple idea that housing should take a smaller portion, but now that line has quietly shifted upward. So now even when a huge portion disappears every month, it still gets labeled as acceptable, and people start calling it affordable without really questioning what that actually costs them long term. And when something essential starts becoming this expensive, it quietly reduces your ability to move freely, because the more it takes from you, the less room you have to make independent choices. So now think about this for a second. Two people earning different amounts but living with different fixed costs, and the real question is not who earns more, but who actually keeps more. And the answer is the one who keeps more of what they earn, because it's not about how big your income looks, it's about how much of it actually stays with you at the end. Which is why a higher income doesn't automatically mean a better financial position, because if your fixed costs grow just as fast, you're basically running harder without actually moving forward. And the deeper problem is rent isn't just taking money from you, it's quietly taking your time, your energy, and the number of choices you can realistically make in your everyday life. So now think about this for a second. Two people earning different amounts but living with different fixed costs, and the real question is not who earns more, but who actually keeps more. And once your fixed expenses reach that level, your freedom starts shrinking automatically, because a larger part of your life is already committed before you even decide what you want to do next. So even if you want to make a bold move, like quitting your job or trying something new, you hesitate, because the pressure of that fixed cost is always sitting there waiting for you. And the same thing shows up when you try to invest or plan ahead, because after covering everything essential, there's barely anything left to actually build something meaningful for your future, which is why the real issue isn't that you earn too little, it's that you're already committed to too much, and the more you owe every month, the harder it becomes to actually move forward. And if you slightly reduce that fixed cost even a little, it doesn't just free up money in the moment, it actually starts creating something much bigger quietly over time without needing anything dramatic. Because over time, those small, consistent changes start stacking up in a way that feels almost invisible at first, but slowly turns into something meaningful without requiring constant effort from you. So what looks like a small saving today is actually building something much larger in the background. And most people completely miss this because they only focus on what they spend right now. And every time that money goes into rent instead of something that grows, it's not just spent and gone. It's a future version of your life that never gets the chance to exist. And even after understanding all of this, people still continue the same pattern. Not because it makes financial sense, but because it feels comfortable in the moment and doesn't force immediate change. Because what you're really buying isn't just space, it's comfort, location, and a certain feeling of being settled, even if that feeling comes at the cost of your long-term flexibility. And the system reinforces this by constantly suggesting that you deserve this kind of lifestyle, making it feel like a reward instead of something that might quietly limit your future options. So you end up choosing what feels good right now, without realizing that it might be costing you the ability to make bigger, more important decisions later when they actually matter. And once you see it clearly, you realize the goal isn't to impress the place you live in, it's to actually gain control over your own life without being quietly restricted every single month. Lowering costs builds the power to decide freely, without financial pressure. So instead of just accepting it, ask yourself, how much of what you earn controls your life? That answer tells you more than your income ever will. Because when too much of your income is already committed, your future options start shrinking automatically, and the higher that fixed portion gets, the harder it becomes to actually build anything meaningful. And when you really look around, you start noticing that a lot of people live in places that look impressive from the outside, but their actual financial situation tells a very different story. Having an expensive place to live doesn't mean you can afford your life. It just locks your income into maintaining that image. So in the end, it's not really about where you live. It's about what it costs you to stay there. Because that cost quietly decides how much control you actually have over your life. So now just think about your own situation for a second and be honest with yourself about how much is actually going there every month. Because that number says more about your future than anything else. And once you actually see that number clearly, it becomes very hard to ignore. Because it's no longer just an expense, it's a reflection of how much control you've already given away.
That feels so refreshing.
Because the moment you stop optimizing for how things look and start optimizing for how your life actually works, your decisions become clearer and your future becomes a lot more flexible. So before your next payment goes out, just pause for a second and ask yourself whether this is buying you freedom or slowly taking it away, because that answer changes everything going forward. And the strange part is most people don't notice this immediately. It only becomes obvious much later when they realize they've been optimizing their entire life around something they never fully questioned. Because what feels like a monthly payment is actually a long-term exchange, where you're slowly trading away years of flexibility just to maintain something that doesn't really give you control back. And even when nothing feels urgent, that constant obligation quietly sits in the background shaping your choices, making sure you stay within a range that feels safe but limits real progress. So the next time you make that payment, don't just treat it like routine. Pause and actually look at it, because that single moment of awareness is where everything in your financial life begins to change. And once you start noticing it, your behavior begins to shift in small ways, changing how you react to financial decisions. So instead of reacting automatically, you begin to question whether each decision is actually helping you or slowly taking something away. And that small pause starts becoming more powerful over time. And over time, those small moments of awareness start breaking the pattern you were repeating for years, because you're no longer blindly following what feels normal without understanding its impact. So what once felt normal slowly starts feeling questionable, and what felt uncomfortable before starts making more sense. Because your baseline for how money should work is finally starting to change. And the real impact only becomes visible when you compare where you are now to where you could have been if those small decisions had gone in a slightly different direction over time. Because what seems like a small trade-off today doesn't stay small. It compounds quietly in the background until one day the gap between what is and what could have been feels impossible to ignore. And the hardest part is this doesn't feel like a big mistake while it's happening. It just feels like normal life, which is exactly why it continues for years without being corrected. So the moment you become aware of it, even slightly, you gain leverage, because now you can start making decisions with intention instead of just following patterns that were never really questioned. And the first step isn't making a drastic change. It's simply becoming aware of where your money is going every month, because clarity alone starts shifting how you naturally make decisions over time.
So instead of trying to change everything at once, you make small adjustments that don't break your lifestyle, because those are the ones that actually stick and compound without creating resistance.
And when your fixed costs go down even a little, your options start opening up automatically, because you're no longer forced into the same decisions just to maintain what you already have. So over time, you're not trying to escape everything instantly, you're just slowly taking back control piece by piece until your decisions start coming from intention instead of obligation. And this is where most people get it wrong. They focus only on increasing income, but if the structure of their expenses stays the same, the pressure just scales up with them. So the real leverage doesn't come from earning more alone. It comes from increasing the gap between what you earn and what you're forced to spend every single month. And once that gap starts growing, your focus naturally shifts from just covering expenses to actually building things that grow over time, instead of constantly feeding something that resets every month. Because in the end, wealth isn't just about how much you have. It's about how much control you gain over your time, your decisions, and the direction your life actually moves in. And this is where the illusion becomes clear, because what looks like an upgraded lifestyle from the outside often hides a tighter financial situation underneath that most people never talk about openly. So without realizing it, people accept this quiet trade where they exchange long-term flexibility for short-term comfort. And because it feels normal, it rarely gets questioned deeply enough. And the moment you start seeing this clearly, you're already ahead of most people, because awareness itself becomes an advantage that changes how you approach every financial decision going forward. So now when you go back to that same monthly payment, it won't feel as automatic anymore, because once you've seen it clearly, it's very hard to go back to not thinking about it. And once this idea settles in, it starts showing up everywhere, because you begin noticing the same pattern in different parts of life where something feels normal but is quietly taking more than it gives.
The more you recognize these patterns, the easier it becomes to step out of them, seeing the structure behind what's happening.
Real freedom isn't about having more things, it's about having fewer obligations that control your time. Most people confuse the two until they experience the difference. So the next time something feels normal, just pause and question it for a second, because that small moment of awareness is usually where the biggest changes in your life quietly begin. And if you've been following along, you probably already have a rough idea of how much is going there every month, which makes this less of a theory and more of something personal. So just out of curiosity, how much of your income actually goes into this every month? Because seeing that number written down somewhere tends to change how you think about it instantly. And if this made you see money a little differently, then you probably want more of these, because most people don't realize how much of their life is shaped by things like this until it's too late. So the next time something feels normal, just pause and question it for a second, because that small moment of awareness is usually where the biggest changes in your life quietly begin. Before you scroll, drop your percentage in the comments, and hit like if this made you think. And if you want to understand money in a way that actually changes how you think and live, then subscribe, because most people don't realize these patterns until it's already too late.